All right guys, so now we're gonna do the Class B straight truck pre-trip inspection. This is part 3 of my Class B series inspection, so that way you can pass and get your license. So for this pre-trip inspection, I'm only gonna show you what is needed to pass the test. I would inspect everybody that gets their license. I mean, it's up to you what you do and how you inspect your truck, but you're gonna inspect everything as if it was your truck for safety of yourself and everybody else on the road. Okay, so I'm gonna start out with my DOT marker lights, and I have 5 amber lights on top. They're properly mounted secure, all hardware is present and in good working condition. Now I also have my headlight assembly. On my headlight assembly, I have my headlights and my high beams. They're properly mounted secure, they're clean and clear and in good working condition. I also have an amber color light on each side of my headlight assembly. Those serve as my turn signals, 4-ways, running lights, left and right indicator light. And I also have on this side a reflector, an amber color reflector, also properly mounted secure and in good working condition. The next thing I'm going to check is to make sure that I have no hanging wires or hoses under my vehicle. Everything is tucked away and properly mounted secured on the vehicle, and I'm not leaking any fluids on the floor, no coolant, fuel, power steering or hydraulic fluid down at the bottom of the truck. Now I'm going to go ahead and open the hood and start inspecting the passenger side of the engine compartment. All right, passenger side of the engine compartment. The first thing I'm going to check is to make sure that all of my hoses and cables are properly mounted secured. They're not cracked, bent, broken, loose, or missing. None of my hoses have no abrasions, bubbles, or cuts, and they're not leaking any fluids. And all of my cables, all my wires, are not cut or frayed or torn or grounding out. Then I'm going to talk about specific parts. The first one is my coolant reservoir. I'm going to make sure it's properly mounted secure. It's not cracked, bent, broken, loose. It's not leaking any fluids. All the hoses coming to and from it have no abrasions, bubbles, or cuts. I can see that it's clear and I have enough fluid for the day, but if I didn't, I would remove the cap, fill to the proper level, and make sure the cap is on tight. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check my washer fluid reservoir. It is also clear. It's not cracked, bent, broken. It's not leaking any fluids, properly mounted secure. And if I also needed to make sure that one had enough fluid, I would remove the cap, fill to the proper level, and make sure the cap is on nice and tight. The next thing I'm going to check is my alternator. This is my alternator. It's properly mounted secure. All hardware is present. It's not cracked, bent, broken, loose, or missing. And all the wires that are connected to it have no frays. They're not cut and they're not grounding. This is belt driven. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that my belt has no frays, it's not dry rotted or cracked, it's not missing, and it has the proper tension, no more than 3/4 inches of play. I'm also going to check to make sure that the first pulley that you follow downwards and meets from the top is the water pump. The water pump is properly mounted secure, it's not cracked, bent, not leaking any fluids, and it's in good working condition, and it is also belt driven. So the next thing I'm going to check is my exhaust, starting from the turbo, which is back here, and it has a heat shield. It's properly mounted secure. All the clamps going down the engine aren't loose, they're not broken, they're not missing, it's not leaking. And if it had any leaks, I would have black soot or black smoke markings indicating that I have an exhaust leak. I'm going to go ahead and follow that all the way down the passenger side. So I'd go ahead and follow all the way down here, and I make sure that all the clamps on my exhaust are properly mounted secure. They're not leaking. There's no black soot indicating a leak. And the only place that should have black soot is at the tip of the pipe, and the pipe should be pointing downwards. So now I'm at the driver's side part of the engine compartment, and the first thing I'm going to check is my oil dipstick. The way I would check that is I would wipe it clean, reinsert it, pull it back, and make sure that the fluid is between add and full. If I needed to add more, I would put it at the cap, which is on top of the middle of the engine, 1 gallon at a time, and recheck as needed. Now the next thing I'm going to go from the dipstick is I would follow from the engine downwards and then back out closer to me. So my next piece would be my air compressor, which is kind of hard to see, but if I follow this black pipe to it, the first thing that it's touching is the air compressor. I would make sure it's properly mounted secure. All hardware is present. It's not cracked, broken, loose, or missing. And it's not leaking any air. All right, so after my air compressor, I'm going to check my power steering pump, which is directly below it. And if you look inside the engine, you can see that on my engine, the compressor and the power steering pump are painted red. but there's also an aluminum piece sticking out. That is my power steering pump. Another way to check the power steering pump is follow these hoses. This is the power steering reservoir. So I'm going to check that my power steering pump is properly mounted secure. It's not cracked, bent, broken, loose. It's not leaking any power steering fluid, and it's in good working condition. All the hoses coming to and from it also have no abrasions, bubbles, or cuts. They're properly mounted secured, and they're not leaking any fluid. Now, being that I just did the power steering pump, I'll go ahead and jump into my reservoir. My reservoir is clear. I can see the level is almost at max. It's not leaking any fluids. It's not cracked or broken. It's properly mounted secure. If I needed to add more, I would remove this cap, add to the max level, and to make sure that the cap is on nice and tight. All the hoses coming to and from the power steering reservoir have no abrasions, bubbles, or cuts, and they're properly mounted and secure. Now the next one would be, I would follow the hose and go to my gearbox. My gearbox is also properly mounted secure. It's not cracked, bent, broken, loose, or missing, and it's not leaking any power steering fluid. And then I'll go ahead and move to my steering column. It's not cracked, bent, broken, loose, or missing, and it has no more than 10 degrees of play. I'm also move down and check my universal joint. The universal joint is not cracked, broken, loose, or missing. It's in good working condition. It's well greased. It's not worn out, and it's working good. All right, so the next thing I'm going to check is my 3-piece steering linkage, which is my pitman arm, my drag link, my upper and my lower steering knuckle in the back, and my tie rod. They are all properly mounted and secure with castle nuts and cotter pins in place in good working condition. They're not cracked, bent, broken, loose, or missing. I'm also going to check my ball joints and bushings to make sure they are properly mounted secure and in good working condition. Next, I'm going to move on to my frame. I'm going to make sure that my frame is properly mounted secure. It's not cracked, bent, broken, loose, or missing. There's no illegal holes or illegal welds on my frame, and it is 2 members that run the full length of the vehicle. Next, I'm going to check my suspension system, which is my spring mount, my leaf springs, my U-bolts, shock absorber, and my spring hanger and spring mount in the back. They're all properly mounted secure, good working condition. My leaf springs aren't scissoring. They're not cracked, broken, loose, or missing, and in good working condition. Also, I'm going to check that my shock absorber is not leaking any hydraulic fluid and is properly mounted and secure. From here, I'm going to go ahead and move on to my brake hose and my brake line. They are both properly mounted secure. My brake hose is not cracked, has no abrasions, bubbles, or cuts. Properly mounted secure. It's not leaking any air. Brake line, it's not cracked or cut or grounding, or the wires isn't exposed. I'm going to go ahead and move on to my brake chamber and my C-clamp. They are both properly mounted secure. It's not cracked, bent, broken, loose, or missing, and in good working condition. I'm also going to check my push rod and my slack adjuster. It's properly mounted secure. It's not cracked, bent, broken, loose, or missing, and I have no more than 1 inch of play on my push rod. All right, the way I would check my brakes is I'd go ahead and chock my wheels or place the vehicle in low gear if I'm on a flat solid ground, and I'm going to release the brakes and go ahead and pull on each slack adjuster. I would mark it to make sure that I have no more than 1 inch of play when I pull on each slack adjuster in the front. Now the next thing I would move on to is my brakes, my actual brake pad or brake lining, and my brake drum. They should not be cracked, bent, broken, loose, or missing. There should be no oil or grease between the brake pad or the brake lining and the brake drum. My brake pad or brake lining should not be worn dangerously thin, no less than 1/4 inch of meat on my brake lining. From there, I would go ahead and inspect the inside and the outside of my rim. There should be no hammering. It should not be bent, no illegal holes or illegal welds, properly mounted and secured, and in good working condition. The tire itself should be beaded against the rim nicely, and it's true and round. Now I'm going to check the inner wall and outer wall of my tire. There should be no abrasions, bubbles, or cuts. It should be in good working condition and mounted to the rim correctly. I should have between 90 and 120 psi, or whatever the tire manufacturer specifications are for this tire. Now I'm going to go ahead and move on to the outer part of my tire and make sure that it's worn evenly. There's no gouges or chunks missing. I should have no less than 4/32 tread depth on the front 2 tires. My tires have to be a matching set on the front. They cannot be recapped, retreaded, or regrooved tires. Next, I'm going to go ahead and, since I already mentioned the inner and outer wall of my rim, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that it is properly mounted secure with the bolts and lug nuts. They're all nice and tight. There's no rust streaks or shiny metal indicating a loose or broken nut or bolt. And I did mention the PSI on each tire. It is 120 for this one, but I'm going to check it through the valve stem. And I'm going to make sure that my valve stem is properly mounted secure. It has a metal cap that's on tight. It's not cracked, bent, broken, loose, or missing, and it's not leaking any air. Next, I'm going to check my oil hub and make sure it's properly mounted secure and it's not leaking any oil. It has a clear sight glass so I could see the oil level. But if I couldn't see the oil level, I'd go ahead and remove this cap and check it with my pinky, and it should go up to the first knuckle. If I needed to add more, then I'd go ahead and add more, check it again, and then make sure I put this cap on nice and tight. There you go. Now this concludes the front portion inspection of my vehicle. I'm pretty much done at this point, unless you would like me to move on, in which case I would ask permission to move on to the next part, and they might tell me that I'm good, or I might have to do from the door, fuel area, all the way to the back. If you have any questions, feel free to post them. Like, share, and subscribe. Give me a thumbs up on it if you like the video. Stay tuned for the second half of this outer pre-trip inspection.